Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Can We Talk, a segment of The Local Scene, which is a production of PAC TV. Today's discussion is going to be on a very serious and sometimes overlooked issue of elder abuse. I'm your host, Donna Rodriguez, and I'm joined today by Conni DiLego, the previous Director of Elder Services for the town of Plymouth, Patrick Flaherty, founder and president of Guided Living Senior Home Care, and Jillian Schrems, Protective Services Program Manager for Old Colony Elder Services. Thank you all for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Donna.
Good to be here. Thank you for having us.
As we said, this is a tough topic, but I don't think it's talked about enough. Would you agree?
Definitely. It's very closeted in some cases because of fear of bringing it up and talking about it or admitting it or any number of reasons.
Being embarrassed, being fearful. And they say an average of 1 in 10 people over the age of 60 in this country are suffering from abuse in some form, and that only 1 in 14 tend to be reported.
And how many seniors are there in this country? So can you imagine what that number really is? We can use statistics, and that's easy to say, but these are people that are really being abused in so many ways, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But you know, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, sexual, scamming, all kinds of ways of being abused.
Let's start there. Let's talk about some of the different ways that, some of the different types of abuse that we do see with people of all ages, unfortunately. So we start with physical abuse, and that could be any type of physical abuse, whether hitting, biting, pulling, physically injuring somebody in some way, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
And you work for Old Colony Elder Services, and one of the many services that your agency provides is a 24-hour hotline for elder abuse and adult protective services for elders going through abuse. So would you like to talk a little more about some of the different types for us?
Sure. So, as you said, we investigate all different types of abuse. There is a 24-hour hotline that people can file the reports with, and the types of abuse that we look into are physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, financial exploitation, caregiver neglect, and self-neglect. So our staff looks into all of these different concerns and really gets to the bottom of what's going on.
What are some of the more common types of abuse that you see through the hotline?
Self-neglect is probably our most common report that we receive. So it's people over the age of 60 who are living in the community and just aren't able to care for themselves, whether they're not choosing to, they're not able to, there's no other caregiver involved. That's the most reported that we receive. After that, it would be neglect by a caregiver and emotional abuse. Financial exploitation is frequent.
If you don't mind, with the self-neglect, how can you help somebody if they call up? They won't call up themselves. It'll be somebody that reports them. How can you manage something like that? What you might do?
So sometimes people call in themselves just because they're looking for assistance, and we really try to sit down with them, do an assessment into their full situation, try to understand what they're looking for, what services, supports they're looking to receive from us, and we can help them with any number of things. The more willing and able they are to work with us, the better outcomes they'll receive. We can make referrals on their behalf for services in the home. We can do advocacy work, help them with things, reporting with the court systems, legal supports, counseling services, anything and everything you can think of we can assist with.
I think one of the stigmas about seeing someone who has self-neglect, whether it's a family member or a neighbor too, it's, you think like, am I like calling like the cops on this person? And it's not something that's adversarial. And from the families that we work with, sometimes they'll just call up and they don't know where to begin, and we direct them towards you. But I think if people are watching and want to take something away, it's that what Old Colony Elder Service is. It's a resource, and it could be someone who is saying no to everything, but it's just sometimes the not knowing what's even out there that's available for someone who's at risk is part of the problem. So I think a takeaway is that you guys are such a tremendous resource for the community that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be some negative confrontational outcome, but it's just getting the right resources to the people when they need it. And that's what I think is maybe something that's not quite as well known about what the hotline can be used for.
Absolutely.
And I would add to that too, even if you have a question about it, that you think something else. You're not, like you said, you're not calling the police on these people, just trying to make sure that they're cared for. And so if you have someone in your neighborhood or a next door neighbor, a senior or something, a family member that is having some problem that you're worried about or you think about, you can always call and question it. you can answer that question and say, well, maybe that's not necessarily abuse or whatever, and put their mind at ease. But it's
Yes.
definitely the best resource.
So let's talk about that a little bit. And I think in both of your roles, in your work through the Center for Active Living, and you have so many people who are in people's homes. So I think this is such a big topic where I feel like we're jumping around a little, and I really want to make sure we're getting all the information out there. What are some of the signs that somebody we care about or a neighbor down the street might be dealing with abuse or neglect or self-neglect? What are the things that you've seen at the center? What have your staff maybe reported over the years?
Bruises, for one thing. You know, and a lot of times that they will cover it. No, I fell. I tripped going down the stairs or whatever. But bruises or depression, not eating, that kind of self-neglect.
Change in
too.
affect, change in mood.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a big one too, where someone might be normally outgoing and chatty, and then someone comes over and visits, and then they get very quiet, you know, and they don't engage, and you know, it's almost they're just worried about saying the wrong thing.
Right.
It's because it's such a vulnerable population, and that person, even though they might be not necessarily, it could be a financial abuse, it could be something not necessarily physical abuse, but there's they see that person as sort of almost like their lifeline, but also they know that it's a negative relationship too, and that's some of the hardest. I can't imagine being in that position where the person who they know they don't want to say anything on is the one abusing them, but it's also their caregiver in a way.
Exactly.
And that relationship can happen in many different ways. But
Because
it's,
over 60% of the situations are really usually from a family member or a caregiver.
Right. Yes.
So what you're referring to is a lot of the times abuse is coming from somebody who is taking care of the elder.
And they're dependent on that care. And if they report something that person could be doing, what does that mean for their care?
And they could be maybe living with their son or their daughter-in-law or son-in-law or whatever, and there's not a good relationship, which happens, unfortunately, more than you would think. That's abuse. And they may not recognize that as abuse. It's, well, I'm living here. I don't want to say anything. You know, he's a good boy. He's a good, you know. And they're afraid to say anything because they'll be kicked out of the house, or the fear,
they'll
like
send
you
me
said,
somewhere. They'll
right.
send me someplace.
Send me. I'll be in the nursing home for sure, or he'll go to jail. Any number of reasons. It's fear, absolute fear that they don't want to report.
And those are
Afraid to.
examples of emotional abuse affecting somebody's behavior, having people think differently about themselves, having people live in situations where they are fearful. All of those are examples of emotional
if you
abuse.
don't do this, I'm sending you to the nursing home.
Exactly.
I mean, like that.
They're not
type
going to
of
be blatant
just-
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just terrible.
Or I'm not going to feed you. Or this is what you're going to eat.
You're going to sign this
That's it.
paperwork, or you can't have visitors. I'm not going to take you to see your friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, is another very common type of abuse, not only from caregivers, but from people just in the community and strangers. Financial exploitation
yeah.
is a very common form of abuse, and we might talk about it as scams.
Yes.
Maybe it's lending a bank card and people purchasing things they're not supposed to be, having elders sign checks when they shouldn't be. There are lots of different ways that people
Right.
are running into issues where their money can be disappearing. Now, you both had some stories that you were telling earlier of people that you might have talked to over the years. Any stories that you'd like to share that are a good example?
Well, I was bringing up the story with talking about scams, of the telephone scams. The IRS and the grandma, I'm in trouble, you send $2,500 and get me out of jail.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I do know of a couple of people who have fallen for that. Because they'll call up and they'll say, Grandma, and you'll say, oh, Joey, is this you? Now they know. Yes, it is, and that begins it, and they get locked into it. There's been a lot. We try a lot, and I know All Colony does too, to warn people about these scams. Never give out your Social Security number, especially. The IRS is not going to ask you for your Social Security number. Your bank is not going to ask.
Right.
Nobody is going to ask you legally for your Social Security number or your bank account.
Don't give your sign-ins
Never,
online
never,
to your
never.
banking account or
Right.
anything.
There was a trick that one of our nurses came up with where they have the same thing, kept giving out the Social Security card. They made a fake Social Security card with the wrong number on it.
Oh, good.
And so it's just, here, and it's, sure, like, give that number all day long. And it's sometimes it's just kind of, knowing the little tricks like that.
Right.
But another one, too, is if someone is very overly protective about the medications and prescriptions and things like that, huge red flag, especially with all the situations that you hear about in the opioid epidemic right now. It's just But sadly, we see sometimes that too, where there's an agency coming in, and all of a sudden it's like, you can do everything but the meds. I got this, and it's like, it's sad. You see all kinds of diversion and that type of behavior, but big red flag there.
And that is a big one. It's almost another whole topic to get away from that a little bit. But I know some of the senior housing, you have younger people that come in maybe, and I'm not trying to put a bad note on anybody that caregiving and stuff, people that really work hard and that are honest. But you do have people that'll visit. I'm going to go visit my next door neighbor who's 85 years old, who's on drugs, you know, and they're visiting, talk, I'm going to go use your bathroom for a minute. Is that okay, Grandma? And then come back with all their medicines gone and stuff. Or I need, you know, my can't feed. What? It's easy exploitation. Seniors are easy to be exploited.
You make a good point. Predators are predators.
Absolutely.
And they're going to put themselves into places frequently where people might be at risk or maybe have diminished capacity or maybe feel that they are obligated. So that's, you're not putting anybody down, I don't think, by you know, saying that. But unfortunately, it is a reality.
It is.
It is.
It's just being comfortable as a neighbor, a family member, or whoever, to know that in an abundance of caution, I'm just going to call. You know, I think something's a little bit off.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's anonymous. You can talk to that too, the process.
Yes.
But it's no one's going to know that you called, and if it's just a safety check. And
Absolutely.
And I think it's that you make a very good point. We've talked a lot about what happens when you call the hotline, and calling the hotline isn't getting somebody in trouble. It's protecting and caring for somebody who may be dealing with abuse.
Yes.
What happens if I call the 800 number, which we're going to give at the end of the show? What's going to happen on the other end of the line? What would I expect?
So once you call, a report is taken by what's called the centralized intake unit. They take reports for the entire state of Massachusetts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're going to ask a lot of prompting questions, information about the person you're concerned about and the reason why you're calling today. Then they end up asking follow-up questions. The better and more information you have, the better the report will be. Once they're finished typing the report, they'll send it to the Protective Service Agency for the appropriate area where the elder lives. That's when it gets screened in for an investigation, and it's assigned a worker to go out and do an assessment into the situation.
And that really is just prompting a whole variety of potential services. So, for example, if somebody might be dealing with self-neglect, they're not as capable of caring for themselves, and may not have somebody coming into the house, you could perhaps refer services to support them being able to stay in their home.
Absolutely. So kind of like you said, it's elder protective services. It's protecting our elders over the age of 60 in the community. Our goal is to keep people as safe in their own environment as possible, and we have all sorts of resources available within Old Colony Elder Services. There's caregiver support programs, there's Meals on Wheels programs, in-home services, but then there's a lot of things outside of Old Colony that we can also offer supports with. Maybe it's connecting them with a PCP closer to where they live so they can get to a doctor, connecting them with the local Council on Aging or Center for Active Living to have some socialization and get out of the home and get things, that they're not receiving in the home, so they're not as isolated.
Yeah. I can't say enough about Meals on Wheels. I'm going to put a plug in right here and right now because we have over 120 drivers. That not at all times. It's sponsored
in
by
the Plymouth area.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm probably just picking a number out of the air, but I know it was something like 260 meals a day that go out, and they're all volunteer drivers. And these volunteer drivers are a lifeline to our seniors. And it's been more than once that they've been able to detect something and come back to us and let us know that we could report and get something done about it, whether it was self-neglect or whatever was going on, or the person was ill.
They're front line. They're going into somebody's
Absolutely.
home and they're getting to see them every day,
Because
Monday
that's
through
the
Friday.
only person that elder will see sometimes, ever.
Yeah.
As the Meals on Wheels the Meals on Wheels saint.
Yeah.
They really are.
They really are.
Now, that brings up another good point. There are many people who could be considered mandated reporters, people who work in health and human services. I would assume your entire staff who goes into folks' homes, they would be considered mandated reporters.
We all are.
So that means that if you see something, you say something.
Right.
You are
Yes.
obligated.
Yep.
And if somebody makes a report, what happens with it? Is their information given out?
It is not. So their report, the reporter's identity is kept confidential. A lot of times people will try to figure out who it is. Our staff does not confirm or deny any involvement of who the reporter is. That does remain confidential. And anyone can file a report with the hotline system. It doesn't have to just be mandated reporters. It can be anyone who has any concerns about a person.
Now, I know just in working with you over the years, Connie, that when you were at the Center for Active Living, people would come in and talk with you and talk with the other staff, and that would ultimately lead to reports as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because these would maybe the children of or the parents of somebody who is being neglected to come in and say, I'm a little bit concerned about mom. She doesn't get dressed anymore, you know, and she's sitting around, and I noticed whatever. But to come in and report that. I would report that. We are mandated reporters, but in a lot of cases where, I think I had the question before, if somebody came in and I wasn't sure, and I'm talking to the daughter of, and I tell the daughter, why don't you call Old Colony, I suggest that and everything else, and then she goes out and that never happens. I still feel responsible, and I believe that would still be a mandated report at that point in time. So any question, when in doubt, call. That's the bottom line.
If you see something, you say something.
You say something, yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the we touched on a couple of them, but let's talk in a little more detail about what are some of the typical reasons people might hesitate to report, whether it be for themselves or for somebody else. What are some of the barriers?
Well, I'll start. Let's say, for instance, in a nursing facility. And again, there are a lot of wonderful nursing facilities here. But you do have some workers sometimes that are underpaid, under trained. If you have a young person working with somebody with a dementia or a problem like that, where the person can be combative, and you have a young kid that doesn't really understand that and hasn't been thoroughly trained, first of all, they shouldn't be on that unit. But if they are, they could be hit. You know, that's unfortunately a time when somebody will take a swing. You know, a worker might take a swing, and the senior, if they have the wherewithal to report that, won't do that because then they're afraid they'll be kicked out. And if they have no place else to go, what does that mean? You know, or if I report that, then the next day I'm going to get it worse. So there's the fear of retaliation is one big thing. And that's the same thing at home. If your son or your daughter or anybody you know is abusing you, you're afraid to have it worse, get it worse.
Okay.
That's one example.
What are some of the other reasons people might not report?
I think just the idea that, they're just fine. You know, it's not, it's like nothing, it's always like a slow build up, especially like the neighbor situation. You might see someone who's maybe not thriving, but they're still doing well enough. And it's like, it's that slow incremental build up of kind of the situation deteriorating until then there's that very sad unplanned event where they have a bad fall or there's not the safety nets in place for like a Meals on Wheels or someone who's coming every day. And that's some of the most terrible stories you read about, but it's getting the resources in place is the whole point of this conversation. The resources could be someone comes in right away and it's like, wow, this is like we're way up here. We need to come in and handle this now. But sometimes it's, maybe they just need like a lifeline, like an actual, the product, the bracelet or the pendant. It's finding what's going to make them be able to remain where they want to be in their home, if that's what they choose, with the resources that are available. So I think it's the idea that they're doing just fine, that, I see them get the paper every day. Well, if you notice, you go over and there's like the things are piling up, or it's just, we had a client where the only thing they ate for years before everything kind of came about was they had just tomato soup every single day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, cold tomato soup. That was it. It's like, okay, that's fine. You made it, but
it's a little OCD.
how'd you get here? And just like, oh, no wonder why you have high blood pressure. Are you having and now you can get off those medications because the diet's different.
And I didn't want to ask for help because there are other people who need help more than me.
Right.
Or
Yes.
I want to stay independent. So I think there are lots of things that people will tell themselves that can help prevent them from getting those help and supports.
And it's a resource. I think that's the thing that most people won't actually pick up the phone and call because they think it's something like it's going to be a police authority or something like that. It's complete opposite. It's people who are, like yourself, like Connie, who are just going to be coming and trying to bring the resources in from a collaborative standpoint. that's the piece I think I want
Right.
anyone watching to really get, is that it's a working together process with that
Right.
person and their family as well.
And with Old Colony Elder Services, I think you can call yourselves an adult protection and support agency, because while you run the hotline and you are able to investigate and ensure people's safety, at the same time, you're the safety net and you can connect them to the community services they might need that hopefully would alleviate the problems that they're having.
Yeah, and we're their advocate. We're there to give them a voice when maybe they haven't had one before. You know, kind of to go back, I think the biggest barriers to why elder abuse isn't reported is the lack of knowledge of elder protective services in general. I was in graduate school before I realized it even existed. I think everyone is so familiar with child protective services, but they don't realize that elder protective services exists. And so having these discussions about elder abuse and that it does occur and it's underreported and letting people know the signs and symptoms is going to be so helpful to understand that it is occurring, and there's a lot of supports that we can offer people to help them through it.
And you know, we've done the walk on the waterfront. Once a year we do a walk against elder abuse. And we carry signs and we shout and we scream and everything else. And people will walk by and say, "What's elder abuse? So are they beating each other up or whatever?" No. That's why this conversation is necessary. It's necessary out there. And I just want to make one other point too, because I always have one other point.
That's why the show is called Can We Talk?
A lot of the people that we're dealing with, and the numbers are diminishing, of the elders, you know, that group of 80 plus, and they're depression babies. They were taught, you take care of yourself, you're absolutely self-sufficient, you don't ask for help. And so
It's a really good point.
yeah, so they don't want to reach out, and they're, I'm going to take care of myself. Or you may have a husband and wife situation, they're both elders. I promise
Yes.
till death do us part. I'm going to sit by her side or his side, and it isn't always the best.
I can't put her in a home. I can't do that to
I
her.
promised her I
Right.
wouldn't. And same thing, I promised my mother I would never put her in a nursing home, or my husband, or that's a very delicate age group, you know, and they're wonderful, wonderful people, but a lot of them are suffering.
And there are a lot of misconceptions. We've talked about that already with the hotline and with protective services, where we're talking about nursing homes like they're evil places. They're not.
They're not,
There
no.
are wonderful
Resource.
rehab facilities, assisted living programs, nursing homes that match people's needs. So there are ways to connect to services and supports. You're not giving up.
Right.
You're being able to have a better quality of life is the goal.
And it's important for the child of, or the parent of, or the spouse of that person to understand that it really is better for that person, the one that's very, very sick or has dementia or Alzheimer's, especially if it's progressed. Better for that person to be in a place where they can handle that. They know how to deal with that. They're not going to get stressed out, because caregivers often die before the person that they're taking care of.
Yes.
Very
That's
often.
a known fact, unfortunately. So it's important to know that there is help.
Yeah. And then the caregivers get, you know, the support that they need
Right.
from the staff in the facility, at the nursing home, and they have the peace of mind knowing at the end of the day that their loved one is being well cared for and is in a safe place.
So fear, misconceptions, fear of losing independence or retaliation. What do you think about embarrassment? Do you think that comes into play
Oh,
for
sure.
some people? I've always been
Yes.
independent. I've always
Oh,
handled
absolutely.
my own business. I can't believe I was scammed. If it was,
Yes.
you talk about people calling.
Yeah.
Do you think that plays a role? Because we're dealing with adults, and if
Oh,
people
yeah.
are cognitively able,
Like, that's very prideful as well. You know, it's
Very.
just that, you know, like you said, the independence, not wanting to, you know, admit that there's something wrong. I mean, that's who would want to do that, you know,
Right.
of any age. So it's very, it's a conversation that probably in families never comes up.
Right.
You know,
And that's something that can lead to that, like, I'm sure it wasn't necessarily the case, but the lady just eating tomato soup all the time. You exhaust your funds because you're going to the St. Joseph's Indian Fund or the Publishers Clearinghouse or things like that you're supporting all the time. And it's once you make a donation out there, you're on a list. You're on a list. And unfortunately, a lot of people fall for those lists because we're soft-hearted and you want to help, but you use up all your money and then all you got to eat is either tomato soup or cat food. You know that, but that's happened. That isn't the first. So, yeah, people beware, please.
So, what are some of the things we can do, or we can talk to our family members or friends or neighbors about when it comes to prevention? What are the things you would recommend to people for prevention?
Say to not be afraid of the conversation itself.
That's
Yes.
a big one.
And it's I think understanding, so every individual person is going to have a different kind of medical outlook. You know, it might be someone who has early signs of cognitive impairment, or someone has like a very devastating diagnosis of Parkinson's, but it's very early. And I think what we found is that when families talk about very hard conversation of what is this going to look like over the next 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and then they can kind of make a plan for that. And then what's very empowering for that person is to know, I'm going to make the decisions of what I want to do for myself now for when I'm not able to make those decisions anymore.
Good point.
Yeah.
So there's some legal documents that can be
Yes.
put into place, like
Oh, yeah.
healthcare proxy, the like
Power of attorney.
all
Yep.
those types of
And
things.
we can help at the center. They do that for
Yes.
people, help them get in line with the things that they need to have. That is so important.
And living wills. And
Absolutely.
Sometimes
Oh, yeah.
it's getting
Your
finances in
DNRs,
order.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
because if you don't,
Now, many of the councils I know in our area, and I assume across the state, have programs where lawyers or other people who provide services come in
Yes.
free of charge and will work with people in the community to help them start to think about these things. And I know Beth Israel had a program going a few years ago that was called The Conversation. And it's how to start that conversation, because again, I think there are misconceptions. When it comes to healthcare proxy, you're not giving your rights or your choice away.
Right.
You are empowering yourself by telling somebody else what you are going to want or need.
Yes.
Same thing with power of attorney. I think people think, wait a minute, you're not my guardian, but that's not what this is.
Right.
You can really specify in a power of attorney what
Yes.
somebody else could or couldn't do to support you.
and Patrick's right. I mean, that is the one. I'm glad you brought that up. One of the most important things is to have that conversation, and it's hard. It's like when you're a mother and father trying to talk to your kid about sex, those uncomfortable conversations, But I've tried to have. They'll yell at me. My conversation with my children, they're all grown up now, and it's like, Ma, we don't need to talk about that. Yeah, we do. I just want you to know. That's
Yeah.
all. This is here, and this is there, and this is what I want, and this is what I don't want, and you're in charge, blah, blah, blah. Just, it isn't, it's going to happen. We're all going to pass away, every one of us. Well, I'm trying to work on not doing that, but we are all going to pass away, and we need, our families need to know what we want.
Yes.
So you avoid a lot of problems when it's over. Talk about abuse. Family abuse when somebody passes away, when they didn't leave any messages on what to be done, huh?
Right.
There's some nice tools there's several out there you could be found, but that actually help guide through, like a workbook. And it's things that you might not even think about, like where people are very private, especially when it comes to financials at times
Yes.
too. And it's like, just to know, go through this workbook. It's like, what are the accounts? What are what do you want to actually have done? And then give that to the lawyer and say, when I'm, gone, this is what, or when I'm not in the capacity to make a decision anymore, this is exactly the playbook of what I want to have happen. And then it's kind of already pre-written, it's in stone, and that's when someone's most vulnerable. You see the people coming kind of out of the woodwork to try and take advantage, and it's like, no, we've already got a plan.
Yes.
Here's who can authorize. There's no, the checkbook's taken away.
Yeah.
That's, I think, would prevent a lot of the situations and the financial abuse that we've come across if it was mapped out.
Is that through AARP?
There's there could be one through AARP. There's one I'm thinking of. It's just like a book you can buy online.
Yeah.
It's like a 3-ring binder you go through. There's some people that actually they walk through this as a profession too to help.
Yeah.
But those resources are
I
out
know
there.
I've
and-
seen it, yeah.
Yeah, it's just.
And we'll be providing some information at the end of the show too for resource materials for
Yeah.
people. But I think these are all great points, and it's all part of prevention. Protecting
Yes.
yourself, protecting your family members, helping your neighbors protect themselves. Take care of their financial health. Take care of their emotional health. Take care of their physical health. So going to the doctor, perhaps getting support. There are support groups, as you had mentioned earlier, spouses caring.
We have caregiver, we have Alzheimer's
Yes.
groups, we have Parkinson's groups. They need to check in other towns it's called this Council on Aging. In our town, it's the Center for Active Living.
Yeah.
Which I prefer. I love that name.
Yes, it is. But there definitely there are resources there too for those.
And these are all methods of prevention to ensure that we're keeping ourselves or our family members safe, and that we're also able to connect to supports and services. Because I think many times for many of our seniors, they start feeling isolated.
Oh, yes.
And that's where a lot of these issues can come
Yes.
into play.
Sure, depression is big when that happens, isolation, depression. That's
Right.
when the self-neglect and the alcoholism, that's another big thing that we haven't even talked about, but that's a big thing of self-abuse. And that's rampant,
Yeah.
unfortunately. That's never talked about.
There are clearly a lot of issues. I think starting the conversation is the most important
It's the
thing.
most important.
What are some other recommendations you would make to folks to protect themselves, to keep themselves out of harm's way?
Exercise. I would say that, like even anybody, but especially with elders, falling is one of the biggest problems people have, breaking hips, breaking bones, breaking knees. But there are exercises you can do, whether it's yoga, whether it's aerobics, whether it's go to the gym, go up to the center. There's a number of places that you can do exercises. Do it at home. Watch yoga on TV or something. But exercise, keep yourself moving, keep yourself flexible. That'll help with the prevention of falls. And then watch your diet. Try not to eat too much. It's easy when I speak for myself. When I love ice cream, and if I find myself when I'm not terribly busy, I'll find myself chewing away on the ice cream. But learning what's a good healthy meal, making sure that you're getting at least your vitamins in, your protein and nourishment. So health and exercise.
I think getting involved, asking for
Oh, my
help, using the supports in your community. The Center for Active Living or the Council on Aging's have a lot of different supports and people there to help with anything. And
Right.
even just to ask, I think is so important, and to ask questions.
Or to have somebody to talk to.
Yes.
People sit up there and, sit around and have conversation. It's stop being isolated. And don't be afraid of going there. They're not all, 95-year-old drooling in a wheelchair, which some of them are, and that's okay. But you know what I mean? People have the wrong image of what
Yes.
a council on aging or a center is. It's not.
And the more people are involved with things in their community, they have a larger, safety circle around them. They have
Absolutely.
more people who are able to either support them, keep an eye
Keep
out,
an eye on them.
or also to be able to, the senior to be able to bounce questions off.
And they're the ones that are going to recognize if something is
Something is-
occurring.
absolutely.
If someone's isolated at home, it's never going to get reported because there's no one to report it. There's no one involved.
I think from the opposite side too of you have, say there's adult children living in Plymouth whose parents live in Oregon, somewhere far off too, can feel a little isolated because you're so far away geographically, but there's going to be a Center for Active Living or Council on Aging or something like that equivalent in just about every town.
Yep.
But another resource that's out there, and it's just like, you have a legal issue, you go to a lawyer. You have a plumbing issue, you go to a plumber.
Yeah.
If you have an elder care question about the plan or how it moves forward, there's professionals out there where this is their job, like care managers. And the national trade group of people who are actually qualified and they've gone through a process, it's called the Aging Life Care Association. And say someone's way across the country, you have no idea who to even begin to call, if it's going to be a scam, if it's going to be someone who's just, a nice neighbor but really doesn't know what they're doing. Just the website, it's aginglifecare.org. You plug in the zip code, and anyone who's qualified and credentialed in that area
that's
will pop
great.
up. And it's a professional. It does have a cost, but that fee of paying that person to help get the lay of the land, check in on that person, or recommend services that they know are quality in the area
Right.
is invaluable.
Oh, yeah.
And when someone has someone like that kind of overseeing them, if they're in a nursing home, if they're have home care services, everyone's kind of aware that there's someone who's checking in on that person, and that really, sadly, it shouldn't have to help, but sometimes
I know, but
that does help.
Especially the person that's being helped. If
Yeah.
you were my son and you're way over there, I know that I'm being cared for. You know that I'm being cared for. So that
It's an extra set of eyes.
Right.
Peace of mind. Yeah.
And I think almost every town
Comforting.
has emergency supports and emergency services as well. And even if it's through the police department or another department within the town, that people can fill out. I don't know, they call them life cards. So emergency cards. If there was an emergency or a hurricane or a power outage, this is the person who might need extra support, a person who might be at risk or vulnerable in the community. So there are lots of different things that might sound simple,
Yeah.
but can be put in place to help protect somebody.
And we do have those at the center. People can get them, and they're magnetized. Put them on the refrigerator and tells what medicines you're on, what your numbers are, who to call, so on and so forth. We also have just come up with one that says, I have a pet. And
That's a
so,
really good
because
idea.
if somebody's going off in an ambulance and they got a cat that's hiding under the couch, you know, so it says, I have a cat and might be hiding under the couch, so that they know. But those things can be picked up at the center.
Excellent. There's also some other things for people to protect themselves, things such as any pension checks or Social Security
yeah.
checks. Consider getting direct
Direct
deposit
deposit.
versus things coming in the mail. Make sure that you always are controlling your own mail, or that you know it's a trustworthy person. It's always recommended, too, for folks to have their own phone and their own way to communicate with their network and their world. Somebody else controlling a phone might limit an elder's ability to communicate. Are there other things along those lines, or coming down to communication and scams, that you would like to recommend people should keep an eye out to protect themselves or to shore themselves up so that they are in better...
Well, one thing is a cell phone. All right, I mean, those bracelets are very good and very necessary at times, but there's also any cell phone at all, as long as it's charged, can call 911. It does not have to have service. So almost everybody has an old one in their house, or your daughter has an old one, or somebody's got an old one around. It can be a flip phone, it can be anything. Just keep it charged. And if you're walking around, you're going out in the garden, wherever, try to keep it on you, because that is always, 911 is always available.
Yes.
That's a very good point. And did you have something you wanted to add?
In regards to, the scams and things to look for with that, be conscientious if someone's getting a lot of phone calls. That's just a huge red flag if a phone's ringing off the hook and it's someone asking them for identifying information, asking questions. That's something that we see a lot of. Be aware of mail that's piling up, an elder who has always been able to pay their bills on time and now they're getting shut-off notices. That's a big red flag.
That's a good point.
Maybe something's going on. They've always managed independently. What's going on with their finances now?
And for children or maybe family members who are living a distance, they can easily, with their parents' permission, be added on to an account. Not that they would be taking money out, but
Right.
at least be able to see and maybe even assist with direct payment of bills to help to support somebody if you're running into a self-neglect type of situation.
Yeah.
Are there places that people can call or websites that folks can go to for phone scams? Because it seems like there's something new every day.
Well, there's the 1-800 don't call, or whatever that call is, but I've signed myself up for that three or four
Sometimes I
times
feel
a
like
year.
they call more if,
I know,
if you hit the "Don't call me" button. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly those lists. It's worth trying to put on. I mean, the landline number that's published, it's just out there. It's probably going to ring off the hook anyway. So getting a new cell phone or even a new unlisted phone number can be helpful. It'll just cut off from all those lists. I like the trick of giving the fake Social Security card.
I think that's a
For
great
somebody
idea.
who might have diminished capacity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Give that number out all day, no problem.
Right.
Good luck trying to
Good luck.
create a credit account on that. But yeah, it's also, there's every case, every person is so different and unique, and there's maybe a dozen different ways to help that situation. And the people who have all the tricks are the ones who have done it for their careers. So sometimes even you call the Center for Active Living and just say, I need advice on
All
this
the
specific
time.
scenario. They're going to have that. They're there to be helpful. It
Yes.
doesn't necessarily have to
If
be.
we don't have an answer, we'll call you.
Yep.
You got
Absolutely.
it.
But that's for sure.
So it's just that there's a community of people out there that are at the call to help, and
There for
just give it a phone call and see what they have to come up with, because there's some really nice people out there.
And as a loved one, you are never, you're only doing a disservice if you don't ask. Your parents or your loved one might be
Yeah.
angry with you at first,
Yep.
but if you're concerned for their safety, no matter what, you should always pick up the phone
Yes.
and call and ask
Yes.
questions and see where you can get supports for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Don't be too proud to call.
Exactly.
Whether you're the person or the relative, do it.
Now we're getting near the point where we're going to be wrapping up. We have a few minutes left. Do any of you have final thoughts or things that you would like to bring up that perhaps we haven't touched on yet in this episode? I know we've covered a lot of information. We're going to be giving out some contact information and some phone numbers too. But I will say that the 800 number for your office is 1-800-922-2275.
Yes.
We'll make that available to folks in graphics as well. But I'd like each of you to just, any final thoughts you have for today, share with us.
Talk about a lot. Yeah.
Really, what I just said is don't be too proud to call.
Yeah.
You know, when in doubt, call. If you see something,
Say
those are
something.
trite sayings, but they're true. Because you can save a life. You know, you can save a life.
You know, we always say everyone deserves to live a life free from abuse and neglect, and there's supports out there, and we just have to get involved and know about it in order to help. We're really involved to be the advocate for people
Right.
and to help them through difficult times, and which they really are. They're
Yeah.
hard times, and maybe they don't have any supports, and that's what we're there to do.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think on that idea is just the collaborative nature of something like, you think it's an elder abuse hotline. It really is, it might as well just be like a resource hotline that can go in different directions. It can be like escalated high because it's something imminent, or it could just be opening up the door of all these resources. And there's so much out there, and you don't know what's out there until you ask. And that's what I would encourage people to just pick up the phone and call, and you'll be amazed what things are out there to support an elder in the community or to support yourself.
Be aware. Be aware. Like the things we've talked about that you can see, whether it's personal care, hygiene that's slipping, or memory slipping, or the mail not piling up, or the person not eating, or bruises, or any number of things. Just be aware.
And go with your instincts.
Yes.
And I always say, ask questions. If something's concerning, you have a relationship with someone, ask, Mom, what's going on with
Yeah.
this? You know, can you help me understand? Or ask your neighbor what's going on, and sometimes you might get answers to your questions.
Yeah, and if something doesn't feel right or doesn't look right, trust your
Trust it.
instincts.
Yeah.
That moment of being uncomfortable will be a million times better than having something terrible happen.
Oh my gosh,
And
yes.
so it's just,
Right.
you read about it, and it's
Yeah.
it's okay to call.
If we have 1 out of 6 people being abused, it's happening.
Yeah. So if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank all three of you for being here today. It's been an incredible conversation, and we'd just like to thank not only our panelists, but all of you for watching at home as well. If you want to watch this panel again, you're going to find it on our community channel, our YouTube page at The Local Scene. For me and everybody here at PAC TV, thank you for joining us.